The world is entering a new dispensation, South Africans and Africans. God has transferred power to you and is ready to restore all that was stolen from your continent through slavery and colonization from the East and the West. He has empowered you to engage in moral and material development using the gospel and the Bible in response to our prayer. The Watchman SA channel, South Africans, is here to position South Africans and Africa for using our natural and mental resources for properly running our own affairs through excellent non-racial leadership, building thriving new economies and political structures based on loyalty to God and unity within the continent, which is very critical. We will use biblical principles for learning from history. And therefore, biblical scriptures, key world historical figures and key events will be interpreted and used for our development into a new dispensation through messages from God delivered by the Watchman in line with Ezekiel 3:17. Be convicted, be ready for action, and let's get into the episode. Here comes the Watchman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again. As you can see in our description today, we are talking about the blind leading the blind. But now, exactly what is the blind leading the blind? Who is blind? And who's leading another blind person? And who is being led by the blind person? So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a scripture from the book of Matthew chapter 15 verse 14 that says, when the blind lead the blind, they will both fall into a ditch. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of South Africa today, we find ourselves in a situation wherein we seem to be led by the blind when we ourselves are blind as well. And what do I mean by that? According to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 16 verse 19 up to 20, the scripture says, you shall not pervert judgment, and you shall not receive bribes, because a bribe is capable of making the heart of the wise person very foolish. So, ladies and gentlemen, right there, that is where we are as South Africans, and we have to be very honest about this. How many of us have paid bribes before, and how many of us continue paying bribes? How many of us are paying our way out of problems, and how many of us are buying our freedom, are buying our way of life in every day? I mean, traffic officers receives bribe every day, making him dark, and also the person who's bribing him to be in darkness as well. So both of them are blind. How many times do we bribe police officers, ladies and gentlemen, leading into blindness for both the police officer and we ourselves? Again, school principals are bribed to be able to admit school children that do not really qualify to be in certain schools in some instances. We have doctors that are also bribed. I mean, doctors are receiving bribe for giving you a letter to excuse you from work or from school. We also have the border police in our borders that are being bribed to be able to allow people who do not qualify to be in the country to come in. Church members are also bribed to participate in fake miracle schemes and so on and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be concerned. This is getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and it is affecting all sectors of our lives in South Africa. And that in itself, ladies and gentlemen, is what is indicting us by the scripture that is saying the blind is leading the blind. Because we see this blindness in the national level, in the leadership of the national level, to an ordinary citizen in the streets. And ladies and gentlemen, we must be very, very concerned. If this continue as it is, we may not be able to recover from this. And ladies and gentlemen, it is up to us to decide as South Africans that we take the right direction. We must decide that we take an action against this. I know some of us, ladies and gentlemen, are benefiting from this bribery schemes and corruption. But ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in the life of a person where you need to realize that the narrow interest of an individual will not be able to help us in any way. Instead, it will just spark into the collapse of the entire country, and there won't be any South Africa to speak about. I also speak to myself, ladies and gentlemen. I was engaged in this at some point, but I realized, ladies and gentlemen, that this is not taking anywhere. It may seem like it is giving you freedom at that particular time, but that freedom is very short-lived, and that freedom will have to be paid by a very big, heavy price by the whole country, because that one small incident, ladies and gentlemen, goes a long way, affecting so many things, becoming a chain reaction of events that corrupts the country deeper and deeper into the pit of hell. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, honestly speaking, I do agree that in South Africa we have so many challenges. We have legacy problem, we have structural problems, we have historical issues of the past that are still prevailing today. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand that we have a prized position, and the position that we have that will not be taken away from us is the political freedom. In 1994, ladies and gentlemen, we gained political freedom, and we need to use that political freedom to be able to build forward. And the only way for us to build effectively is when we put bribes out of the way, because bribes are a very big component leading to corruption. And corruption is destroying our processes, is destroying our institutions, is destroying our morals. Even our own well-beings are being destroyed by corruption itself. I mean, right now, despite all the problems that we still have in the country, we have some things which are functional, which can be able to help us to be able to go forward in prosperity. They are not much, but they are strong enough to be able to carry us and sustain us. All 60 million of us. I mean, we have a functional democracy. We have a functional government. We have a stable government. We have 32 ministries in our parliament. And we have ministers and deputy ministers. We have the executive. We have the president himself. Let's take advantage of that stability, ladies and gentlemen, and let's strengthen it. Let's keep it the way it is. Let's put this issue of bribes and corruption aside, ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of the country. I mean, when it comes to the security of the nation itself, we have around 180,000 police officers with more than 1,200 police stations all over the country. We have the IPID, and we also have the Hawks for a very serious crime-related issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see that we have something to fall back on, but it is up to us to keep what we have safe from bribery and corruption. When we look at private companies, we have about 10,800 private security companies. And ladies and gentlemen, with all those figures, why is it that we seem to be losing the fight against crime in South Africa with so many private companies and this SAPS? Why do we seem to be losing? And I can tell you why. It's because of our blindness of receiving bribes. Police are bribed, private companies are bribed. We see securities allowing criminals into premises to steal just because of a bribe. And in some cases, the bribe is just a very ridiculous amount. And ladies and gentlemen, you must understand that this goes a long way. I know most of you, some of you are benefiting from these criminal and bribery elements, but we are becoming darker and darker and darker, and eventually we'll lose everything that we thought we had. I mean, currently we have about 36,000 army personnel of the South African Defence Force, including the Marine, including the Home Affairs, with 184 offices all over the country. But ladies and gentlemen, despite all those resources, including the Home Affairs Police, we still fail to maintain our borders. We still have a problem in terms of managing who's coming in, who's getting into the country, who's documented, who's undocumented. We try to deport them. They come back the next week. And ladies and gentlemen, we reach a stage where we do not even know what to do with them. We have the National Prosecuting Authority, which, ladies and gentlemen, represents the state in criminal matters. But now the NPA, ladies and gentlemen, has become very fragile. We lose even the most simple of cases. And it is so discouraging, ladies and gentlemen, to see how much resources have been allocated and how much resources have been spent on cases that just end up after so long with the dismissal of the offender. Just like that. We should be concerned, South Africans. We should be concerned. I mean, witnesses are being silenced and it doesn't look like we do much about it. We don't seem to be protecting potential witnesses, which are very key in cases. We've seen quite a number of them that are killed. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize that we are corrupting our systems. We are destroying ourselves. Right now, we are still in a situation, we can still recover. It is not too late, but we need to make a decision. We need to take a decision to stop. We need to clean up our acts. And it doesn't start with government. It starts with us as private citizens. You must recognize that government is just the reflection of the society. What the society is will just become the extension of what we see in the government. And ladies and gentlemen, don't you ever expect your government to be pure and perfect when you yourself are not working on your own issues. Because these are societal problems, ladies and gentlemen. If you are not faithful with 100 rands, you will not be faithful with 1 million. If you are not faithful in your office, in your humble job, you won't be faithful in a higher office, in government. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our acts together. We still have a functioning justice system with resources. We have magistrate courts. We have regional courts in different places. We have the Supreme Court of Appeal. We have the Constitutional Court, which is able to interpret our laws and also our constitution. So ladies and gentlemen, you can see that the structure is still there. We still have these resources, and let's take care of them before we destroy them completely, because if we continue like this, ladies and gentlemen, all these courts and all this infrastructure that we have will just become useless. We still have a functional pension system. Grannies are still paid monthly. We still have a grant system that is working properly. 26 million recipients are receiving their grants, the child grants and the unemployment grants. So let's keep it that way, ladies and gentlemen. Let's keep it that way. We still have the RDP. I mean, RDP houses since 1994, 3.3 million of them were built. And what is surprising is that despite all these housings that were provided, we still see hijacked buildings in urban areas. We still see informal settlers in different places, despite all the houses that were given. Could it be that people were not supposed to be staying in RDPs as staying in RDPs? Could it be that councillors were bribed to give people who do not qualify for RDPs? And ladies and gentlemen, we are not making progress. We are reversing. We are destroying everything that we have because of bribe. The blind leading the blind. We are allowing ourselves into blindness. And when we are in blindness, we are both going to fall into a ditch. Us and our leaders, ladies and gentlemen. And no one has to blame the other. Each of us has to take responsibility, because this responsibility will not be left to the government, and this responsibility will not be left to the citizen. We all have to play a role together. Because if we don't, ladies and gentlemen, there won't be anything to blame. There won't be a political instability to blame. There won't be any president to blame. There won't be a lack of infrastructure to blame. There won't be any lack of resources to blame. There won't be any black people to blame. There won't be any white people to blame, ladies and gentlemen, but we'll just collapse like fools. And it won't matter anymore. We won't be having a country tomorrow if we have to continue in this direction. I also speak to myself. So ladies and gentlemen, let's recognize that at the moment we still have 600 hospitals all over the country. Yet, medical services are still a problem in some areas, despite the number of hospitals that we have. Could it be that we are unable to reach all these places because of our blindness? Could it be that, ladies and gentlemen, with the freedom of press that we have, the SABC, and more than 4,000 independent, privately owned media houses, could it be that with all the 4,000 churches that we have in South Africa, we are able to have a high moral high ground? Because churches, ladies and gentlemen, honestly, they were supposed to be a moral regeneration of the society. But instead, we hear pastors accused in church members accused of this and that. We hear churches being dragged to courts and so on. And ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, if the church is not in its right place, you really are in serious blindness and serious darkness. And South Africans have to be concerned about things like that. So it is the role of everyone to make sure that we get this right. In our constitution, we have chapter 2, which is full of the Bill of Rights. We have so many rights, ladies and gentlemen, but every day we are reading about the gross violation of human rights domestically and in public offices and everywhere, even in private institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, what is our problem? Blindness. Blindness is our problem. And we are allowing blindness to lead us, and we are allowing ourselves to be blind, and eventually that will just end in a disaster, ladies and gentlemen. But there is still hope, ladies and gentlemen. We can still revive this. God is looking for men and women out there who will be able to stand for the truth, who will be able to stand for righteousness, who will be ready to suffer for what is right, who will be ready to lose everything for what is right, who will be ready to influence positivity to society, who will be ready to teach society that there is a reward in doing what is right, even though you may be victimized by doing what is right. But remember one thing, the arc of the moral universe is very long, but it bends towards justice. Eventually you will be vindicated. For as long as you are in the right, the truth will always find its way back into the public, and it will always be known that you were right. And things, ladies and gentlemen, you will be able to have a very powerful influence all over society for the good of mankind. I mean, someone may argue that perhaps we have the problems that we have because of our road conditions. But honestly speaking, ladies and gentlemen, we have the N1, we have the N2, we have the N3, we have the N17. We have proper road infrastructure that is connecting all our provinces. Therefore, that cannot be an excuse, ladies and gentlemen. But could it be that some of these roads are not of quality because wrong people bribed their way into getting the contracts and could not finish the roads? Could it be that we are having roads that are still outstanding for the past 4 years because of that? We look at our justice system, despite the fact that we have all these courts that we have. You find people who are still awaiting trial 4 years into the charges. They are still waiting for a trial. Ladies and gentlemen, there's got to be something wrong with us. Traffic officers are bribed. Police officers are bribed. School principals are bribed. Doctors are bribed. Border police are bribed. Church members are bribed. Ladies and gentlemen, how far will this bribery go? How far are we willing to get deeper into all this? But I believe out there are men and women, South Africans, which are ready to make a difference, which are ready to stand for this. And ladies and gentlemen, it does not have to take millions of us to make a difference. From wherever you are, in your individual space, you can influence your society where you are. You can influence the space around you. And remember, righteousness can spread like fire. So ladies and gentlemen, let's stand for what is right, and South Africa will get somewhere. Thank you very much.